something unique for ourselves.
You spoke earlier about when you were writing about your book, you spoke about how when you told your friends that you were writing this book, they were all waiting for salacious gossip, you know, like, okay, so whom are you writing about? Who is this character? And what, are you going to speak about this? And you said, no, you know, and your book starts off with how we expect to feed off this, and we've been feeding off this, and we've sort of given rise to this entire tabloid culture. So you subvert, you're sort of a double agent that way, like, for one, you're poking fun at these celebrities, and you're also poking fun at the tabloids. So what is your take on this need that we have to know who slept with whom, what they wore when they were sleeping with that person, and who cheated on whom? And, you know, all of us click on those links, though we claim we don't, and, you know, you might pretend you don't know who Ranbir Kapoor is, but you still went and saw those bikini pictures of him and Katrina Kaif. So what do you think of our attitude to this?
No, exactly. I mean, this is it. It is social satire, not only directed at Bollywood, which is a very easy and obvious target. That is hardly the intention, or high society, you know, and the fact that they're high most of the time is another easy target. But I'm talking about ourselves. I mean, holding a mirror up to ourselves and saying, this is who we have become. We have devolved into vampires that feed on the depravity of others. You know, and the media is constantly feeding you juicy tidbits of gossip and moving from one salacious story to another, because we, you know, tire very quickly of one fable of iniquity and we need the other. So it's that vicious thing. If it's now Tarun Tejpal, next day Justice Ganguly, you know, waiting for the third man so that we can, you know, expose and pillory him, rightly so, possibly. And that continues. So I certainly see this as a malaise that inhabits and infects us all.
On that note, I think I'm going to ask you to read possibly the most unromantic part of your novel involving this. I'm not going to give it away. I think you should read it out.
Well, I don't know about unromantic, but I think just sort of a quick passage that shows how I've subverted these notions of romance as they exist in the traditional romantic novel, perhaps the ones that young adults read and which is a huge market. It's about a young rising Bollywood star and his girlfriend who happens to be wealthier than him, happens to be more sexually experienced than him, and you know, so it's just a short passage. As Ricky drove down the asphalted crescent of Marine Drive towards suburban Bandra, a frisky, inebriated Ria leaned over and started nuzzling the handsome actor's neck, even as her hand wandered between his thighs. She playfully nibbled a sensitive earlobe and sensuously massaged his crotch. When her tongue wandered deep within his ear, and electrified, Ricky realized he couldn't possibly wait another half hour to get home. He veered off towards Pedder Road, towards Kemp's Corner, and drove straight down to Breach Candy, expertly maneuvering his car with one hand as the other clumsily tried to undo Ria's silk blouse. Pulling into Scandal Point, the deserted lover's lane at the water's edge, he switched off the engine and cupped Ria's elfin face in his hands. This was a scenario he had fantasized about since the age of 13, and Ricky Kumar wanted to savor the moment when finally, after all these years, he would consummate his love for the beauteous Ria Zaveri. Detective Virendra Dadda, who had been anxiously lying in wait at Scandal Point for Gautam Goyal and Caesar Adebayo, was intrigued by the BMW that had drawn into the quiet cul-de-sac. VD, wearing a sweater, muffler, and woolen monkey cap in an effort to keep himself snug, squinted through the long infrared lens of his camera to get a closer look at the occupants of the vehicle, and almost fell off his perch in the peepal tree when he caught sight of the driver. He recognized the nation's new heartthrob, obviously here with a girlfriend whose head was currently in his lap. When VD adjusted the focus on his lens, he was flabbergasted to find the girl was not, in fact, resting, but performing vigorous oral sex on the rising Bollywood star. The private dick swung his zoom lens into action and shot off a long burst of images at high speed. These sensational pictures would undoubtedly fetch a huge price, and Vidi knew that even though it was Ricky Kumar getting lucky with some young lady that night, it was he who would eventually bhangra all the way to the bank with old Dame Fortune.
Right. And I hear Malavika has very modestly not brought her book. So I'm going to ask if you can tell us a story from it, which maybe the closest which Milton gets to Chiclet.
Well, yes, I could do that. I haven't brought my book because it's much to do with history of astronomy, alchemy, and things of that kind, which was quite, I thought, not exactly meant for today. But yes, there is much in Milton that is similar, but there is another little story that I wanted to share with you. And we all remember that, the story of Helen of Troy. And I just, if you recall, this is Marlowe writing in Dr. Foster's about Helen. And these are absolutely amazing lines about Helen. Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. Her lips suck forth my soul. See where it flies. Now that is a sort of idealization of Helen that we are all used to. Whenever we hear that name, that's what we think of. But recently, I was reading a book called Legal Fictions. Legal Fictions is a book that takes many of these archetypal stories and puts them in the format of actual legal cases. So here is a case that Helen's husband has brought against Paris. Menelaus was Helen's husband. He has brought this case against Paris for damages. For, he had to take out so many ships, so many soldiers, etc., etc. So a lot of money was spent, and now he wants to recover that from Paris. So he's brought this court case against Paris. And I wish I had that book with me. But the court case hearing goes on, and the judge repeats what is said about Helen, about this tempestuous relationship between Helen and Paris, about her leaving her husband and going away and sleeping with this other man, and now being brought back. And the judge then says, all right, so much you'll get in damages, but so much you have to compromise for. And then after that, Helen and her husband are on their way back home. He triumphant, having got his wife back and also having got some money in return. And then they get onto the ship, and they have been allotted 2 separate cabins, not to share the same room. And then he takes another look at this fabulous Helen. And the thought that comes into his mind is, I would happily give back the money that's been given to me to Menelaus if he would take Helen away, because the years have gone by and she is no longer the beauty that she was. He doesn't want her anymore. So, this is a marvelous twist, I think, to another of the great love stories we all read about. And that, in some senses, is often what reality is like, isn't it?
Right, and like I said, my book is about arranged marriage. So in many cases, it was people for whom relationships hadn't worked out or who had never met anyone. But I have a chapter called The Horror Stories, which were very which were a reality check for people who decided to give arranged marriages a shot. So I'm going to read out a few snippets from that. There are some women, and I must include myself in this lot, who believe that a groom hunt can be a series of traumatic experiences. Of course, one knows sensible people who have had arranged marriages to each other, but sometimes a good match can seem like something that only happens to other people. Most women I know have had at least one terrible encounter, but the good thing about this is they'll give you plenty of stories to tell. So my first one is called The Gentleman Missed Caller. While I didn't meet anyone in the arranged marriage circuit face to face, I did consider a proposal for someone I'd met through work. I was 22 years old and I just got a well-paying job after returning to India with a master's degree. When the person in question told me he was in love with me, and this was at our third work-related meeting, and he wanted to marry me, I told him to speak to my family since I was neither attracted to him nor put off by him. That state of affairs would change when I came out of the studio one day to find 7 missed calls from him. I called back and apologized for missing the calls and asked him what was wrong. He replied, sounding puzzled, No, those were meant to be missed calls. Journalists get reimbursed for their phone calls. No, I have to pay my own phone bill, so I thought we'll communicate this way. So this is what feminism did to me. The next one is called the Malayali Frank Zappa. This is a friend of mine whose name in the book is Shreya Gopal. Her real name is something else. But Shreya Gopal's first meeting with a prospective groom was in 2007. She refused to wear a sari and her parents settled for a salwar kameez. I think they were relieved I didn't insist on wearing shorts and a t-shirt, she says. But anyway, there was this ladki dekhna atmosphere, and that's how the madness started. My house was spring-cleaned and spruced up, and all the stuff that was considered junk was packed away and stuffed into the balcony, and everything else that was considered unsightly was stuffed under the bed. Basically, all excess fat was trimmed. The house looked spick and span, but you look under the bed or the balcony, and you'll see everything that went into making a disastrous house. Ironically, this would become a metaphor for her interactions with the boys, who were uniformly tall, fair, good-looking, highly qualified, and often turned out to be podgy men with soft stomachs and oil dripping through wisps of hair. The first Ladki Dekhna started off on a sour note. It was May Day and Shreya had to cancel an outing with her friends to meet this guy. So I was sulking about how this had been sprung on me. The bell rang. I, of course, don't know how to be coy, so I opened the door and went, "Hello, how are you?" My mother's standing and wondering what was wrong with her daughter. And I'm wondering what was wrong with my family. This guy had a Frank Zappa-style 70s handlebar mustache, and he was dressed up really strange. Shiny formal shirt with jeans, and really shiny formal shoes. And I could smell the coconut oil on his hair from where I was standing. I was like, oh. So I went to the kitchen and said, thankfully he's taller than me, at least, great job. So now they were asked to get to know each other. She says, there was literally nothing about him I could get excited about. His idea of reading was the newspaper. And his idea of partying was, I party but only with boys. And I'm like, what? And then he looks at me and goes, your eyebrows have a really nice shape. Do you go to the parlor like every day or something? The shape of her eyebrows altered at that question. And then he said something about how, see, when I marry a girl, she has to have 100% character. She said, I have no idea what he meant by that. It turned out he had already met his idea of the perfect bride, and he went on to describe her to Shreya, emphasizing her 100% character. And I'm thinking, why didn't he just marry her, she says. What's he doing in my house? Then I realized she must have rejected him because he's boring, he doesn't talk, he doesn't read, he doesn't watch TV, he doesn't know what not to say. I mean, suddenly he saw my brother sitting and laughing with everyone else, and Mr. Sigmund Freud goes, hey, your brother's a flirt, right? So this was the last time she met anyone in her house. But then her family didn't give up on her, so they arranged for a meeting in a club. She had no intention of meeting anyone at home. And then, so this guy comes to meet her. I kid you not, he was 2 inches shorter than me. I was wearing flats and he was wearing those sidey platform heels. So when my dad said, you guys talk, I'm going for a swim, I was like, oh no, please don't do this. Anyway, the waiter came up and this guy ordered 2 Red Bulls. I'm like, excuse me, I'd rather have a Coke, thank you for asking. When the drinks finally arrived, by which time Heels had asked her about her hobbies, that's a question they always ask in the arranged marriage circuit, you know, like, what are your hobbies? And you wonder what you're supposed to, like stamp collecting, coin collecting, drawing, painting. So he realized that this Red Bull wasn't cold enough. She said, I'm sipping my drink and suddenly I hear this voice going, let's share the cock. I nearly choked. And then I saw he was pointing at my drink. Shreya doesn't remember much else from the encounter except for her relief at her father's return. Thank you very much. With that, I think we can maybe throw the floor open for questions to the audience.
Hi there, Nandini. I think that's a very interesting extract you read there. So, the basis of your book, is it from personal experience, or where do you draw your material from?
Mostly it was from friends of mine who had arranged marriages, because this was about arranged marriage and the modern woman. So in my case, I think when I was single, every time I was sort of single in my early 20s, or my parents didn't know I was dating anyone, I would be asked to meet people. And I said, okay, let me first talk to them on the phone. I don't want to have to meet someone who's, you know, like Shreya Gopal's characters. But no, I think it didn't work out for me. I mean, thankfully I found somebody after that, but then it didn't, like the whole arranged marriage thing didn't work for me. But then it gave me a lot of stories, and I told my mom, one day I'm going to write about this. And fortunately, Random House approached me and said, would you like to write a book on arranged marriage? I said, why not, you know? Maybe it's more autobiographical than my mother would have liked, but yeah.
Should have been...
No, sorry. You were saying?
No, I was saying she should have been published by Random Spouse.
That's a good one.
But just another following up question, then I'll give it to someone else. The friend stories that you've used, because I'm a writer as well, and I've written